Hello everyone and welcome to AIMM Life Sessions. My name is Scott Keiklak. I'm the Dean of Student Services here at AIMM, and I've also been a recording and mixing engineer for over 20 years now. I was very fortunate to work out of Criteria Recording Studios in North Miami and got to work on many platinum and gold records. So today I want to work with you guys on some vocal processing and effects. All right, everyone, let's get to it. The first thing I want to mention as a mix engineer, it does matter how you record your vocals. So you can't record something that sounds really terrible and expect a mix engineer to just shine it up and fix it. What goes in is what comes out. So it's very important that if you're recording at home, like many of you are doing, that you're doing the best possible job you can with that recording, making sure that the vocals are clear and clean. It's really a microphone and preamp combination. A lot of people think they buy an expensive microphone, my vocals are going to sound great. It depends on what you're using as a microphone preamp. The combination is what really does it. So what I want to do with this song is I want to just work on the lead vocals with you today, but I want to take a listen to see what's going on here and just give you my instant thoughts of what I hear in the vocals. Now, if you look at the track here, you can see that I've already got plugins on it, and I've also got some sends. So I'm going to deconstruct what I did and just explain to you why I did it. So let's take a listen to the vocals real quick. I'm going to solo the vocals to take a listen and really hear the detail of what's going on. Right there, what I kind of noticed is I think they can sit in the mix right, but what I'm hearing is not a lot of clarity. So I want to just get an idea by listening in solo to see really what's going on with the detail of the sound. So when we mix, a lot of times I think the mistake that young mixers make is that they will do a lot of EQ and compression in solo where they're not hearing it actually mixed with the song. What really matters is what's happening when everything's playing. So I'm going to listen in solo just for the detail.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be.
There's a little bit of low mid-range going on in there that I definitely either want to get rid of or take down a little bit and attenuate, or I might add some top end to see if that shine is what's needed. So another thing I'm going to do is compression. Now there's steps of compression. A lot of people think, well, I turn a compressor on and it levels out the sound. But sometimes it's steps, tiny increments of compression that really make the best product at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, by looking at it, I can see here what's going on. And if you look at the second verse, this verse is much louder. So that person, the amplitude's hotter. So that person may have recorded it on a different day. They might have just had that verse is a little bit stronger for them. But what I want to do is level this out a little bit. So sometimes my first step of compression is actually using Audio Suite. Audio Suite's going to apply that compression or that effect to the clip and make a new one. So a lot of people don't do this, but it works well for me. It's just something I've found in my mixing style that works well. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to highlight the track and I'm going to cut it off here at the end by hitting the S key and just deleting that. And I'm also going to delete what's here at the front with the A key. And I want to get in and really listen to what's happening at the beginning of this vocal. I want to edit it so it's clean, but I don't want to remove the breaths. I think breaths to me in music and the way that somebody sings, I think that's part of it. So I like to leave it in unless an artist tells me they don't want it there. So let's take a listen and see how close we can get. And just take a listen to what's going on and where we could start this and still get the intro breath. It's right there. That happens. So I'm just going to back up a hair and you can hear them. She's taking a breath there. So I want to leave that there. So I'm going to actually drag and delete this. And I'm going to put a little bit of a fade right on the beginning of this so it ramps into that breath slowly. When you're looking at a fade, what it's doing is literally ramping volume from 0 all the way up. So it just softens the edge of it. So let's take a listen.
We were young.
That sounds great, that works. So we're going to do the same thing at the end. Listen to when the breath dies or the vocal dissipates.
Risk.
So right there you can hear risk and then it ends.
Risk.
So right about there. So I'm going to cut this with the B key and I'm going to drag this back a little ways and go ahead and put my little fade on the end.
Risk.
That works. I'm going to do the same thing with this verse. So what I also want to do is duplicate playlists. Playlists in Pro Tools are a way to make a copy of what I'm working on without actually affecting this actual clip that I'm looking at now. It's something that I love playlists because it allows me to do things quickly, and if I don't like them, I can step through. So right here, there's a little blue drop-down arrow that allows me to duplicate. And if you notice, there's already a few of them there. You see 1, 2, and 3. So before I even did any of this, I duplicated the playlist. So if I duplicate it, it means that right now, if I cut this like that, and I didn't know any other way to get back to the original track, I can go to the drop-down and just flip back to the one before it. So it's almost like a deck of cards where I can have one card on top, but I can have many stacked underneath and pull them up whenever I need to. So that's what playlists are for, and I use them quite a bit. It's one of the best things in Pro Tools. I love it. So I'm going to zoom in on this and take a look, and it looks like I'm cutting the breath off a little bit. I just want to take a listen. Okay, so there it is. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing at the end. Again, this is called cleaning vocals. This is part of the mixing process, part of the editing process, making sure I get this as clean as I can. Because at the end of a mix, you are going to print what's called an acapella. Acapella means it will be just the vocals with the effects and sometimes without. So I want to make sure these are clean as possible. So when I do print those, I know that everything's very clean.
We'll let it go.
Okay, so right about there, I cut that with the S key, that cuts everything to the right. And now that I did this, this is now another playlist. So I'm going to duplicate it so I have a copy. There's a shortcut, Control Command / and return, where I just duplicated this playlist. The same thing is going underneath here. So now I'm pretty safe to do what I need to do with this, and it should be fine. So I'll do this one piece at a time, you can see what I'm talking about when I'm mentioning Audio Suite. Audio Suite, again, it's clip-based, it's file-based. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to grab Dynamics, and I'm going to use RCompressor. RCompressor is one of my favorite compressors. The reason why is it's very transparent, meaning it doesn't change the way something sounds. It simply does its job of compressing, which is softest to loudest. It's going to minimize dynamic range. So I'm going to switch it back to the other look. I kind of like the old school look. There it is. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to set it. I actually have a setting already set up in here that I saved through presets. This setting seems to work very well for me with what I do with Audio Suite, as long as the clip itself is a good usable level. What I mean by that, if we do Option F, that zooms in, I'm going to make this bigger so you can see it a little bit better. Right now, the clip has a lot of room, or a little bit of room at the top and bottom, where I might be able to bring this clip up just a little. The reason why I'm going to bring this up just a hair is because when I compress it, I'm going to lose a little bit of gain. But if you see here, I have makeup gain. So the gain that I lose, the compressor is going to put it back. So I'm just going to increase this clip a little bit by using clip gain inside of Pro Tools. Notice it's already at plus 5.2. So I brought it up a little bit. I'm going to give it one more click up. And you saw the waveform get a little bit bigger. With this setting, I want this to hit right around 3 dB of gain reduction. So it should hit right around that spot. So I'm going to go ahead and render it, which means it's going to create a new clip with this compression on it. So I'm going to hit render. And this is the compressed version. Now I'm going to undo it so you can see what it looked like without that 2-to-1 compression on it. That's what it looked like before. This is without compression. This is with compression. So you can see how it takes the stuff that's a little bit lower and kind of brings it up, but it's really pushing the tops down and the bottom part down. So it thickens it up and makes it a little stronger right away. So that's, for me, I like doing that because it gives me a little touch of compression before I even start treating the vocals. So it's not something everybody does, but I feel like it works for me. And again, there's no rules in this. You mix the way you mix, as long as the product, meaning the song, comes out sounding great. Nobody really cares how you got there. Just get there and make that song sound great. So you're going to see many different engineers mix many different ways. This I'm not going to increase anymore because it looks about the same size as the other one now. And I'm going to go ahead and render it. You can see again, thickens it up. By squishing it down a little bit, it thickens that whole waveform up. Now that I did that, these two clips are now, I'm going to create another playlist because I want to keep leaving a trail to go backwards in case my artist comes in and says, I don't like anything you did with the vocals. I want to hear the originals. I can flip the playlist back to where I didn't treat anything. So I'm going to go ahead and do Control Command / return again, and now we can actually start looking at what I did and why I did it. So right there was the first step of compression, right? So remember that. That was step one. Now if you look at the EQ, I actually didn't roll anything off or take anything out of the vocal. I actually added high end. And if you look at this, 6.5 dB of 4K. When I was in school, people tell me to stay away from 4K, stay away from this, stay away from that. over time you realize it's how you use these frequencies. So I didn't actually filter anything out. Instead of lowering the bottom end, I actually increased the top end to get a little bit clearer. There's many different thoughts on this. Subtractive EQ is better. You shouldn't add. I don't look at it that way. I look at it, whatever I need to do to make this vocal sound the way I want it to sound, I'm going to do it. Whether it's subtractive or additive, that's up to me. But I tend to add a little bit more than I'd subtract because I just think it sounds bigger and more full. So let's take a listen to it just with this EQ. So I added 6.5 dB of 4K at a very wide Q. The Q means how does the shape of this bell curve. If you look at it, if I make this tighter, the Q tighter, you see that it's not taking as many what we call side frequencies. It's aiming mainly at that frequency and taking a little bit of these frequencies. But if I make it very wide, that's actually more pleasant to us as human beings. And the range of this is taking a lot. It's not just 4K. It's 5, it's 6, it's 7, it's 4, 3, 2, it's going down. So it's a big wide bell curve that I feel works better. I'm also using what's called a shelving EQ at the top. That shelving EQ is lifting everything 10K and above. So it's giving it a little bit of a shine. So let's listen to it without it. I'm going to zoom back in. Let's listen to it without the EQ real quick, and I'm going to turn it on in the middle. So watch that bypass button.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this, a curse of love.
So you saw all the high end I brought out of it, right? You might be saying to yourself, wow, that's a lot. That sounds over bright, but we didn't listen to it in the track. We talked about that. Mixing is everything together, not individual tracks. So even when I add one plugin like this, I'm always going to listen to it with the rest of the music. So far, just one EQ, nothing else. Let's take a listen to it in the track. So I'm going to turn it off and on so you can see the difference of how it sounds like it's being turned up, but it's not being turned up. The frequencies are different. That's making it poke out of the mix. Without it,
we were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this, a curse of love, we hunt for the ribs.
so you saw how that poked the vocal out, right? And again, it sounds a tad bit harsh to me right now, but I'm going to see what happens as I add the rest of it. So right now, that was the Focusrite D2 equalizer. I love this equalizer, especially on vocals, because of the clarity of it and really the top two bands. That's what I love more than anything. The high mid-range band and the high band. Now again, a lot of people might look at this and say, man, you're adding a lot. Doesn't matter. I want to make sure the song sounds right, period. I don't care what the numbers say. I care about what it sounds like. So a lot of times I'll literally grab this with the cursor and look down and turn it until it sounds like I want it to sound. Then I'll look up and see what number it is. And a lot of times it's shocking. Whatever, it is what it is. So I'm going to close this, and then I'm going to talk about our second level of compression and a plugin that I absolutely love to have on. We already talked about RCompressor. Well, now we're looking at RVOX. RVOX is a Waves plugin, and this is what I call, it's a, for lack of a better term, it's a popper outer. It pops things out. It moves them forward into the speaker. So you'll hear her singing, and when I pop this on, she's gonna sound like she ran up to the front of the speaker. And you'll hear a lot of people say when you're mixing, Scott, I want that in-your-face mix. I want that mix where everything's right there. That's what they're talking about, bringing the sounds up to the front and making it a little bit aggressive. So I'm going to turn this on. I'll bypass it. It's bypassed now. When I play it back, I'll turn it on, off and on. You're going to hear that vocal pop up even more. So it's the tiny things. I'm not trying to overdo anything with one plugin. I'm trying to step it up until that vocal ends up where I really hear it and where I feel it should be.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this, a curse of love, we hunt for the real.
Now I'm going to show you in solo what that sounds like, because that might have been subtle. That's the point. It should be subtle. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. So I'm going to go ahead and solo it, and I'll play it back for you, and I'll bypass it on and off.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this.
So just a slight bit of difference there and a little more compression, so it's not as jumpy as it was or dynamic as it was. So I'm just trying to whittle this down to get it to land where I want to in the mix. So it's the tiny steps, it's the detail. It's not taking one plugin and crushing it with compression and taking another one and over EQing. It's not any of that, it's tiny steps. So you're not gonna hear huge differences, it's where it ends up. So far we did one step of compression audio suite, we did EQ with the Focusrite D2, and then we also added in RVOX by Waves. So that's one that I use quite a bit on vocals. This chain I use quite a bit on vocals. Now, you might have noticed, some of you might have noticed, that there's an empty space in the insert. I leave that empty space because there's a thing people talk about all the time. Should I EQ first? Should I compress first? What should I do? What you should do is leave a space and drag it around and see what works. Because the way the inserts work in Pro Tools, they're in series. So this one feeds that one, which feeds the one below it. They all feed each other in series. So I also want to mention, if you looked at the output here, notice that the gain is down at -3.9 because when I pulled this compressor, it's not just a compressor, it almost acts as a maximizer too. It adds harmonics, it brightens things, and it will get louder. So in that case, if I'm adding gain, I want to make sure I bypass it, and I don't want to add gain when I'm adding these plugins, I want the effect. So if you look at this, I'm going to bypass this real quick in solo.
We were young.
The level's right around where it says waveform there, right? I want to put this in and not have much of a change.
We were young, wild and free.
It's slightly under where it was before. So I could take this gain and bring it up a little bit, and that's what the gain parameter is for. It's for you to level out. If I'm adding or subtracting, I need to get that gain leveled back out. So remember, it was right around the top of waveform, or right around here.
We were young, wild and free.
That's with it in, this is with it out.
We were young.
So you're losing just a touch, but again, I'm doing that with that compression. That's what's taking it down. So I want to level that stuff out as close as possible, and I think that'll work for what I'm doing. So I'm going to take that out again, and I'm going to move on to the next thing. So remember, RCompressor, there are compressors that do more than compression. They're actually effects. They actually bring out frequencies and they do something to a sound. They color it. That's not the same as something like the RCompressor that I used earlier. That one is strictly colorless. It compresses. This one doesn't. This has a little bit of a pop effect to it. So that's where, as an engineer, I need to know my plugins. I need to know what are my go-tos. What can I go to make this happen? So these two are some I really love. Also, love the Manny Marroquin EQ. What I love about this the most is this top band. So some of you are looking at this and saying, wait a minute, that says 20K. It does say 20K. And we know that we hear from 20 hertz to 20K. In this case, should I be able to hear that? I don't know, but I'm going to play it for you and I guarantee you do. This is what puts in air. That's what you'll hear people say. Put that air, that pop sound. Air is the really top frequencies that'll just open up the vocal and make it kind of sit above everything else. So this is something that I've been doing for quite a long time, just adding a little bit of 20K, which again will open the sound up. So it's bypassed right now. Let's listen in solo and then I'll turn it on for you. You see if you can hear the difference.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this, a curse of love.
If anybody heard that slight bit of opening, all of a sudden it got just a little more open than it was before. So that, I think, really works well. And I'm going to crank it up for you. I'm going to remember what I had it on. I have it on 4.7. I'm going to turn it so you can kind of really hear what it's doing.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like.
So that's what it's really doing, and I highly suggest you do what I just did. I think when I started mixing and recording, I was too timid with things. I wasn't turning knobs to see what they do. If you don't turn this all the way up to see what it does, sometimes you're turning it and you really don't know what you're listening for. What is that parameter doing? So turn it all the way down, turn it all the way up, see what it's doing. It's kind of the search and destroy thing that we do with EQ a lot. Turn the gain all the way up and move the frequency around until you find the wanted or unwanted frequency. And then you can either attenuate that or you can boost it, whatever works. But don't be afraid to turn knobs. You've got to do that to learn what things sound like. I'm going to put this back down at my -4 or +4.7, and I'm going to put it in the mix now and let you hear what it sounds like. So now I'm going to take it, and when somebody says that, they mean take it out of solo. So let's play it back.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a
if you have noticed, have I touched the volume at all? I've not touched the volume. It's the same volume it was at before. I'm trying to level it out with my plugins so the volume doesn't go up, but that's what I'm doing. If you look at the level here on the screen, the meter, that's the clip going into the plugin. So that I want to remain at a good, healthy level.
We were young.
That's riding perfect. About 3/4 of the way up, that's where I want to end up. So the first thing, so we did compression, we did EQ, we did another compression maximization, a little pop, and then we did a little bit to add air or that poppy sound with the Manny Marroquin EQ. The next thing I want to do is De-Esser. Now De-Esser is exactly what it sounds like. It is literally something that takes out sibilance, or it's basically a one-band frequency dependent compressor. I can aim it at a frequency, and when that frequency happens, it pulls that frequency down or attenuates it. So it's compressing based on frequency rather than level. So in this case, I started at a frequency of about 5K, 5.5K. Some people may say, well, wait, don't S's happen above that? Some anywhere from 4 to 7 to 8 range is where you're going to have sibilance, depending on who it is, what microphone, all that kind of stuff. But what I want to do is start a little bit lower. If I start a little bit lower, rather than going up in the 7, 8, 9 range, if I start a bit lower, this will also get K's, those kind of sounds also will get grabbed by this, and it will kind of make it less obtrusive in a way. It's kind of, that stuff can hurt. Really high frequency and sibilance, it'll make you turn the mix down. And I definitely don't want any clients turning a mix down. If they're doing that, something's bothering them. I want them to crank it as loud as they can and it not fatigue their ears or freak them out because there's too much sharp high end. So the De-Esser is going to compress that. So I added a lot of high frequency here. Now I'm going to actually control that high frequency and push it down. There's another school of thought. Another school of thought is to take that De-Esser and put it at the top of the chain. Take those frequencies out before you add anything. I've tried that, and for me it doesn't work as well. I've always been of the school of putting it near the end of the chain. So that's what I did here. I put it near the end. So let's watch how it reacts. I'll solo this and you'll see at frequencies, the S's and the sibilance, it's going to jump down a little bit and attenuate. So I'm going to leave it off, and I'll turn it off, on and off so you can hear it.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this, a curse of love.
So you saw those S's. Whenever an S hit or some note like that, you would actually see it attenuate. So it's when it sees those high frequencies, it pushes them down, and it kind of softens out the vocal a little bit. So let's hear it in the mix now with the De-Esser in there.
Chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this, a curse of love.
Okay, so far I like what we're getting. Again, it's not perfect. As I'm mixing, I'm just going through and I'm going to tweak a few things, but right now I think that's working. So now there's another plugin I added, which is a CLA3. This plugin is another compressor. So how many steps of compression are we already at? We did Audio Suite, we did RVOX, now we're adding CLA. That's the third step of compression that I'm doing. So I'm actually going to use this. Whatever the first compressor didn't catch, or the first two, it's kind of filtering it out. The first one catches this. The second one catches what that one doesn't catch. The third one is going to catch even more. So instead of hitting compression really heavy and kind of sucking the life out of the sound, I'm just going to step it down. That's why we call it step compression. Slowly stepping this down till it's compressed and tight in the mix. Every word needs to be heard. Every word. So I want to make sure that every word stands up. So let's take a listen with it and without it. I'll bypass it.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this, a curse of love. We hunt for the ribs.
That started to make it feel like it's sitting right. So that little bit, and you notice the gain reduction was only 1, maybe 1.5 dB. It wasn't a lot. So I'm hitting these things very light to get them to sit where I want them to. The last thing I did, and again, this is not the same. It's always case-by-case basis. The last thing I did was I added a little bit of a maximizer. I'm not sure if I'm going to like that right now, but I'm going to try it, just see what happens. So what this does, this is actually Maxim, which comes with Pro Tools. This is a maximizer. Some people would say I wouldn't put that on a vocal. There's no rules. You do what you think is right and make it sound right. So if this worked for me, I'm going to try it. If I don't like it, I'll take it off. So let's hear it in solo and see what this does. And then we'll listen to it in the mix. So I'll bypass it off and on.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this.
It's another subtle little pop. That's what I did with it. Just a little push toward the front, just another step in. So I'm not mad at it. I want to hear it in the track. And if you guys have noticed, there's no reverb, there's no delay, there's nothing on this. I want to make this vocal sit dry in that track where frequency-wise it works with all the other instruments. So I'm not in a hurry to throw reverb on it because then I'm covering up some of that and I may not know what I'm listening to. So for me, I try to treat the vocal, get it sitting right, then I'll start putting the effects on it. So let's take a listen in the mix with all 5 or 6 of those plugins on.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this. A curse out of love, we hunt for the risk.
Okay, it's sounding all right. Now, what may happen is when I add reverb to it, it's gonna push it back a little bit in the mix. When it pushes it back a little bit, some of that little harshness that's on there may come off. So I'm gonna wait until I get the effects on to see what happens. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add reverb to it. Now, reverb is the space, right? The space you're in. It's kind of us creating a fake room that this singer is in. The plugins nowadays, these things sound so good. I've found some really, really good reverb plugins. And one of them is Pro R, which is it FabFilter Pro R? Yeah, FabFilter Pro R. This plugin, it's relatively new. It's very, you can tailor it very easy and make it sound exactly how you want it to sound. And it's got some great presets too. And I'm gonna turn off the help menu. How do I turn it off? Oh, there it goes. So I'm gonna turn this off. And you've got many different parameters here that make this I can personalize it, make it sound, customize it, make it sound exactly like I want it to sound. So let's see what I did. So what I did was create an aux track, and I'm using a send. I'm using a bus to actually send a piece of that signal, route it through that aux track, which has the reverb on it, which then comes out to my main mix. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this on so you can hear it. I'll take it off, I'll solo it so you can hear it without, and then I'll turn the send on.
We were young, wild and free.
Dry, and here's reverb.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could.
And you really hear what it's doing when you stop it. When you stop the playback, you can hear the tail and hear what's happening in that reverb. So I really liked how this sounded. It was long plate is what I started with and just did a couple adjustments. You might say to yourself, wow, that sounds like a lot of reverb. But once it's in the track with everything playing, a lot of that's gonna disappear. So let's hear what it sounds like just with the reverb in the track.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be.
So all that's going on in there, but I know you guys heard that, how it kind of disappeared into the mix. Again, that's why we don't work with things in solo. Solo's just for the detail. When I'm adding this in, I'm gonna play the song, and it depends on how much reverb I put on is by the send. So if I turn this send all the way down, there's nothing.
We were young.
And then I'm gonna send a piece of that track through the reverb. So watch the reverb track as I turn this up.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this.
So that's where I determine how much reverb is happening on a specific channel or a specific sound. I'm not gonna do anything with this return track, as we call it. I'm gonna leave that at 0, and it depends on how much reverb I want, depends on the send and the send alone. So far, I think that's working. I wanna listen to it one more time in the mix, meaning out of solo, just to hear it one more time.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this.
Sounding pretty good. And again, you would think that's too much reverb, but not when it's in the mix. I like the way it's making the vocals sit in the music. There has to be a marriage between the music and the vocals. They all have to be together. So this kind of lets it blend into the music a little better. So that was reverb that I added with the Pro R. And then I also added bus 3, which is a delay. So in this case, this is a static delay. Static delay means it's just gonna be little repeats kind of floating under the vocal. And what it does, it gives it depth. It kind of gives it a little more of a kind of spacey feel, but again, nothing you're gonna really notice. With this delay, it's almost what's called a psychoacoustic effect. It's an effect that your brain notices, but you don't necessarily go, wait a minute, is there a delay on that? Delay are repeats. The me, and they dissipate. That's what the delay is. So I added just a static delay, meaning that's gonna stay riding under there the whole time, and that's gonna throw those words kind of back into the song a little bit. So I'm gonna take the reverb off because it's difficult to hear the reverb or hear the delay when the reverb's on. So I'm just gonna show you what the delay is, and again, ascend to an aux track where I can control the level from here. So take a listen.
We were young, wild and free, chasing my...
Right? I know some of you went, I didn't hear that, but when I stopped it, you heard it. So what I did with this delay, this is H delay that I ended up using. They're eighth notes, and it's actually tied to the BPM of the song. So it's tied to the BPM of the song, and it's eighth notes. So I'm gonna go ahead and solo it so you can hear what it's doing. Because again, in the track, some of you went, I don't hear anything. Right, listen to this. And I'm gonna turn off this real quick, so I wanna show you what that is in a minute.
We were young, wild and free, chasing my...
Those repeats, right? So it's when you hear it in solo, you can actually hear it a little bit. But when the track is playing, you don't hear it and it floats in the background.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind it could be.
By using that send tells me how much of that track is actually being fed into that delay. So we've got reverb and delay on this. Now I want to show you a trick with delay that's something we all do and have been doing it forever. But sometimes with the repeats that you're hearing that's coming out of that plugin, it's dry, meaning it'll sit too up front. Watch, I'll stop it and you'll hear what I mean.
We were young.
It's kind of just right there. What I want to do is make those repeats float even farther back in the song. So to do that, I'm going to use reverb. So I actually put a bus on the return of the delay. So where are the repeats happening? The repeats are happening at the plugin. So if that's the output of the plugin, I'm actually going to tell the plugin, hey, when you go through those repeats, send those repeats to the reverb also. So I've got a little bit of that space where the repeats will float back. So take a listen to this. I'm going to make it active.
We were young.
Little floaty. I'm going to do it. I'm going to exaggerate it so you hear what it's doing.
We were young.
See that? Much more float than it had before. This is without it.
We were young.
This is with it. This is with it.
We were young.
See how it gives it space, that depth is there. Now again, it's not something I want to hear. I want to create this vocal to sound so magical, and by doing this, it's setting it back in the song and giving it some kind of character that you just wouldn't get from a dry microphone. Our job is to make everybody sound great, and I definitely want these vocals to sound as good as possible, and I want the singer to be proud of them. That's huge. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this down to where I had it. Again, just a little bit of a psychoacoustic effect. 29.7, I believe I was at. There we go. And now let's hear it with the reverb and delay together in solo, and then we'll put it in the track. So I'm going to unmute the reverb. So this is reverb, delay with reverb. So check it out.
We were young, wild and free, chasing my...
So you don't hear it as much now because the reverb is washed in with it. So it's got a little bit of an eighth note delay going on. That's going into reverb. Then it's already in reverb. So it kind of floats it out and you don't notice it as much. Let's hear it in the track.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind it could be. A savage wish to stay like this, a curse out of love, we hunt for the rich.
All that going on in there, and it disappears when all that music is happening. So very standard kind of effects I'm using, nothing crazy. I didn't invent any of this. I just know from working for years that this kind of thing works, and it makes a singer. This to me is the difference between a professional mix and just a rough mix. A rough mix means that I'm not taking the time to really look at the detail of each of these sounds and how do I make this vocal really come to life. Our job is not only blending and making sure the vocal's loud enough or low enough, our job is to make magic happen. That's what mixers do. So that's what I'm trying to do. And you've got to put your all into it because everything you do is your reputation. If I send this mix out, it's going to be sent to other people and they may ask who did it for a good reason or for a bad reason. So I always want it to be for a good reason. So the last thing I want to do here is I want to add a little bit. I'm going to make this smaller so you can see what I'm working on. Well, not that small. What I'm working on now, next thing I'm going to do is pitch. So pitch shift, a tiny bit of pitch shift does some pretty cool stuff. And when I was a kid and we first started messing with audio, I didn't realize what we were doing, but we were actually doing this. We just didn't really know what we were doing. So I want to show you what plugin I'm using and why. And again, this is something a lot of us do. So right here on another auxiliary track, again, using a send, so sending a piece of that signal to the auxiliary track, I'm using Doubler 2. And what Doubler 2 does is this allows me to pitch one side up just slightly by sense, not semitones, nothing you're going to notice, but one side gets pitched up slightly, in this case by 6 cents, the left side is being pitched up. The right side is being pitched down by -6 cents. That's very little bit, but what that's going to do, it's going to make a vocal that is straight up like this, and it's going to pop that vocal out and make it wider. And when we make it wider, it's going to sound thicker in the mix. So again, nothing you're going to hear, very psychoacoustic, but I'm going to turn it up so you hear it. So this is sent off bus 7. So I'm going to go to bus 7. Right now it's bypassed.
We were young, wild and free.
I'm going to take it, I'm going to put it in and see if you even notice it.
We were young, wild and free.
Not really, right? Some of you are going, I didn't hear that at all. Right, it's not supposed to be heard, but if you look at the pitch shift, you'll see what it's doing, and then I'm going to turn it up to show you actually what it's doing.
We were young, wild and free.
Very slight, right? It's very slightly in there. Let me turn it up loud to show you what I do. And this number I always use, it's kind of a set it and forget it type thing. I don't really mess with it. I set it at -24/7, and I'll put this on all my vocals, backgrounds, everything, just to slightly pop them out. And I'll show you with an analyzer so you can actually visually see what it's doing. I'll show you. So take a listen if I crank it up.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be.
Right? So all of a sudden, this vocal got big and kind of phasey. I don't really want to hear that, but again, you always have to know what the effect is doing. Turn it up, see what it's doing, and then bring it back to a usable place. So right now, I'm going to pull this down slowly, and we'll end up back at my -24/7.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic.
So even if an artist said to me, solo that and I don't want to hear any effects, I would probably leave that bus 7 on because that's part of the overall sound to me. It's not necessarily an effect, it's part of the sound. So let me show you with an analyzer. I can put an analyzer on the master fader, and I'm going to show you real quick what it actually does. And it's a pretty cool thing to see because initially I don't think I understood what it did, but I want to show you real quick what that does. So if I go into sound field and pause analyzer, this will actually show me right down here what a mono track looks like. Mono meaning there's no stereo image in it. A vocal, there's no left and right in my vocal. If I could do that, I'd be rich. It's just mono, it's one source. So I want to show you what the vocal looks like in solo with no effects at all. So right now, no effects. It's going to be a straight line right up the middle here.
We were young, wild and free.
Right, so looking in the left-right spectrum, it's just a straight up line. There's nothing to it. Watch what happens. I'm going to clear it, and watch what happens when I put just that bus 7 doubler on it. Watch what it looks like.
We were young, wild and free, chasing.
So it took something that was completely straight up and just widened it a little bit. That's all I want. I just wanted to make it a little thicker than it was before. And again, these are not things that artists know you do. If they ask me, I'll tell them everything I did. Most of the time they don't. They say good, bad, or indifferent, one of the two. So that's a really cool thing I wanted you to see. That's what that bus 7 does, that doubler does. I'm going to crank it up so you can see what can happen if you go too far.
We were young, wild and free.
Right here, when it gets into the red anti-phase zone, that's telling you that you're having phase issues. So this can actually push things outside the speaker and make it actually get out of phase. So it's a little too much. So again, for me, there's no rules, just something, again, I'm always honest with you guys, tell you what I do. For me, 24/7 has been working perfect. So I just leave it there, I get this little thickness.
We were young.
Perfect, that's all I'm looking for. So now let's hear all of those together in the song. So this is going to be reverb, static delay with reverb, and the pitch shift on it.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a kind we could be. A savage wish to stay like this, a curse out of love, we hunt for the risk.
That's sounding pretty good to me. It's really getting there. The last thing I would do, now again, this is just, as you're mixing, you don't necessarily do all of this at once. Sometimes I'll do a little bit to get the vocal closer, and as I'm mixing the music, I'm always popping the vocal in. The vocal is in most of the time as I'm mixing music. From kick snare on, I'm popping in and out a lot because I want to make sure that vocal sits in the music and not on top. Right now, it may be slightly on top, but I wanted you guys to hear the effects on what I'm doing. The last thing I would do is the dreaded automation, folks. Automation is important. Automation allows me to turn up and down words that I don't hear or things that I hear too much. I can turn them down. This is part that I think a lot of younger engineers skip. If it gets too dynamic, meaning loudest to softest is too much, they automatically take another compressor and slam it on there. That's going to take away that natural feel that's happening right now. So if I listen through, let's find a word or two that's loud or low, and I'll show you how to turn it up. But when I get done, this sometimes looks crazy. The line is all over the place, but when you listen to it, the vocals are set all the way through. Again, I've got to hear every word. So let's take a listen from the top of it and see if there's a spot that I can hear that should be automated. And I'm going to hit the down arrow. The down arrow is going to drop the cursor right where I want to zoom in. Pro Tools zooms to the cursor. So if I drop it there, I can get to it quickly. Let's take a listen.
We were young, wild and free, chasing my
Disappeared a little bit. And if you noticed, I wasn't looking at it. Always remember, engineer, not engine eye. Don't look at things. Listen to it. So we have a tendency to see a big waveform. It's louder than everything else. That is not the case. A lot of times it's not louder than everything else. So I want to not get into the habit of staring at the screen, but really using my ears. That's what we're doing. So let's take a listen and listen to that word free. It dips just a little bit.
We were young, wild and free, chasing.
It's nothing crazy, but it's enough where I didn't hear it as clear as everything else. So if I go to the word free, I can literally highlight across it, and I'm in the automation lane. How I got there was right here in the track view selector, or track selector view. Right there is where I did that. What you saw me do was a shortcut, which is the minus key in the QWERTY. I can hit minus and it flips between waveform and volume. That's something as a mixer I use all the time. So if I go here and I highlight this word, I can then grab my trim tool, which is in conjunction with the smart tool. As I move this tool up and down, it changes between selector and trimmer. I can click to the highlighted place and I can just bring this up a little bit. And I might bring it up just not even a dB, that's an eighth of a dB. Another thing that makes it that I want to do is I want to play this from back at the beginning of the song, or at least a few bars back, to get situated and remember what it sounded like and let that word pass by and see if it works. So take a listen. Loop on, it didn't click.
We were young, wild and free, chasing.
It seemed to work, and that was 0.8 dB. That was nothing. It was barely a little bit. I could even ramp it if I wanted to. If I felt like the beginning was loud but the end wasn't, I could actually grab just one of the breakpoints and pull it up, where it would actually ramp it up. And if you watch the fader move.
We were young, wild and free, chasing.
On that word free, it just went up. So what automation does for me is what we used to do old school style. I would grab a fader, the engineer would play it back, and at a certain point I would push it up and down. But I didn't have anything to do that for me. So automation is super important. I do that once, it's there for the rest of the mix, so I can work on my own and still do all the automation moves I used to do with a whole bunch of people in here. But it would take 4 or 5 engineers sometimes to print a song back when we were working on tape. So I'm going to undo that little end. I didn't like that. But again, I want to listen through and see if there's anything else that bothers me.
We were young, wild and free, chasing magic, a comical.
I got a little loud. And again, I'll do this last example and we'll be good.
Chasing magic, a comical be. Chasing magic.
It's not bothering me. Let me play it back again.
Wild and free, chasing magic, a comical be. Savage wish to stay like this, a curse of.
Definitely a little low, so I'll turn that up.
Savage wish to stay like this.
Disappear a little bit. The S was fine, which is this piece right here. So that's the S right there, but I want to bring just this word up a little bit. So I highlight across, grab it, and turn it up a little bit. 0.8 of a dB, and let's back it up and play it.
Savage wish to stay like this, a curse of love.
little you have to do with automation sometimes. It's not about cranking things up. It's just making it stay even. So automation like that in Pro Tools, just using the volume line is what I was automating. But if you wanted to automate mute, it's a black line. If I wanted to automate pan, it's a black line. If I can automate one black line, I know how to use the tools, I can use the rest. So that's really, that's usually how I treat vocals, you guys. And I think for this, that'll work for me for now, just dealing with lead vocals, but it's always about how that vocal sits in the song. So it's not necessarily volume, it's all this stuff put together. If I didn't have to use that many plugins, I wouldn't. I try to use the least I can, but I also, again, the end product is the end product, and that's what I want. And I really appreciate you guys joining me. Hopefully you learned something from this. You can all do this. You just have to put in the effort. Thank you very much, everybody.
Savage